In this episode today, I'm joined by Rin Hamburgh, and Rin is an expert in thought leadership and expert marketing. Now, this is one of those cut-through subjects that I've been really passionate about over a number of years, but it's never really, to me, risen to the surface of priorities for marketers and business professionals. But I think here in 2023, as we're all looking to really cut through the noise of social media and really make inroads into what can be, very much commoditized marketplaces, I think thought leadership and expert marketing is now going to find its day. Now, I'm sure we're going to hear from Rin that this has always been a thing, but I think for a lot of people, this could be quite new. So I'm really fascinated to find out both about Rin's journey into this as a real specialist area, but also what we can do about it as marketers, because I want to make this a really kind of practical session, and then we can glean lots of the expertise from Rin as we go through this. So welcome to the episode, Rin.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Very, very welcome. Tell us a little bit about your journey, because you didn't start here. This wasn't the starting point for you, was it? It was very much, I guess, coming out of your sort of experience and journey through journalism that you found your way to this point. Tell us a little bit about the backstory.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, I started as a journalist, and I've always been a writer. I've always enjoyed writing. So that's sort of where it started. And I think what happened as a journalist, the skills that I learned that I didn't really realize I was learning for now, is that ability to very quickly speak to somebody, speak to an expert, and become not an expert myself, but enough of an expert to write an article about it. So, I'd get into work on a Monday morning, and I might be, excuse me, assigned a subject that I'd have to write about, and I might not know anything about it, but very quickly I could do a bit of research. And obviously, as a journalist, you're trained to look at what is good, what's a good source, and then also speak to the experts and to kind of get their thoughts and their kind of quotes and put an article together. So then when I went freelance, that was in 2010, so I'm showing my age a little bit. Obviously, the internet was very much changing. Marketing was changing with kind of the rise of digital. And so increasingly the skills that I had as a journalist became, commercially relevant as well. And so, yeah, just sort of evolved. So, yeah, copywriting wasn't even something that I really understood, or content marketing when I started doing it. And it's just really evolved from there. But yeah, definitely that ability to speak to an expert, to ask the right questions, to find the kind of the hook in the story, to find what's going to be interesting to people, and to be able to draw that out, and then summarize it in that way. That's I think what we offer as a business, as well as the actual pure writing skills. So it's communicating expertise.
Yeah, and we'll kind of, I guess, get into the detail of that as we go through this conversation. But I'm really interested in terms of kind of the mindset that is needed kind of in that style of role, because I mean, I guess, if you're kind of almost learning from scratch a lot of topics, as a journalist, and I can see there's a lot of kind of spin off into this sort of thought leadership space. It is about being really kind of fleet of foot, isn't it? And very kind of very awake to the situation or the scenario or the conversation that you're actually in. You almost can't do this without paying attention. It feels like you have to, as a communicator in that kind of environment, be very awake to all the changes and all the opportunities.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, listening is a massive part of it. You really do have to pay attention, and you're constantly, you've sort of got to split your brain in two, and sometimes in three, because when I was doing my shorthand, because back in the day I wasn't as good as touch typing, and I was often out, in location, so I just had my notebook and pencil. So you're asking questions, you're listening to the answers, you're writing the answers down, and you're trying to formulate a follow-up question at the same time. So yeah, you've definitely got to split your brain into lots of bits. But yeah, listening is very important, and also you've got to have an idea of what you want somebody to say. So it's not you putting words in their mouth, but you've got a story to write, and that you need certain quotes, because experts have a tendency to kind of go off on tangents, and they get very excited about their stuff, but actually you kind of need them to focus on the point of what your article is, whilst also digging for the real gold, which is not something that you'll necessarily know off the top of your head. So it's that balance. You've got to guide the conversation, but be looking out for those nuggets. And I think it just takes practice, like anything. I'll talk about this during this episode, but everything does take practice. You're not born good at it. You've got skills that you start off with, but I think in the practicing, what I learned was to listen out. And it would be often at the end of a conversation with somebody, I would suddenly go, that's it. They'd do a throwaway comment. And I was like, why didn't you mention this at the beginning? But of course they weren't skilled. For them, it was just a normal, natural thing to be saying. But to me, it was like, that's the hook of the story. That's my intro, or that's my closing quote, or whatever it is. So yeah, definitely listening in a very deliberate way.
And I love that idea of just the hook and that little golden moment, because, and again, as I often sort of find this, interviewing people and having conversations, on the podcast and elsewhere, is that sometimes, as you say, you can get all the way through the conversation and then suddenly there is just that phrase or that moment, and you think, there's the moment, there's the short form video moment for social media that's going to really be the hook. And I guess we're all, as podcast hosts, or as, thought leaders, or, crafters of good content, we're always kind of on the lookout for that, because it is those little bursts of inspiration, I guess, isn't it? That kind of, I guess, is that the definition really of like an expert, and somebody who is just that little bit different from the run of the mill, because they have that opportunity, because of their wisdom or their sort of expertise, or the length of time they've been sort of doing what they do, that they can really uncover those things, because to most of us, we wouldn't be able to do that, would we?
I do. I definitely think that there's a combination of things, and I think you've touched on a lot of them there. I think length of time is an important one. I really don't think that you can shortcut expertise, because the definition of an expert is somebody with special skill or knowledge that represents mastery of a particular subject. So you can have a skill, you can be born with a skill, right? And an ability to, I don't know, look at code in a certain way. You've got a particular maths brain, or you've got a language brain, or whatever it is. So, you're born with a set of skills, but you still have to practice those. And some people might get to an expert level quicker than others because of that natural skill, or because they are particularly dedicated, or whatever it is. I don't think length of time, you can have somebody who's been doing something for 20 years and still wouldn't be considered an expert. You can have somebody that's been doing it for 5 years and is an expert, but generally there has to be a length of time. I think if you've got somebody, who's very early on in their career, and they're trying to, or a new brand that's been started by very younger people, and they're trying to set themselves up as an expert brand, that's going to be a little bit less authentic than somebody who really has been doing it for a while. So that is that. But exactly that, as you said, about that like spark, that extra thing, that is just that bit different. It's about. So I was thinking about, there's an amazing book called Expert by a guy called Dr. Roger Kneebone. He's a surgeon. How cool is that his surname is Kneebone and he's a surgeon? And he kind of describes the journey towards being an expert as, it's got 3 stages. So you start off when you're in the apprentice stage, and that's when you're just putting in the time. So you're under somebody else's tuition or guidance, and you're really just, putting in the hard graft. And then there's middle stage, which is the journeyman stage, and that's where you move from this kind of supervised sort of stage to more independent practice. And, you start taking responsibility, you're maybe developing your own style, and you can start to take initiative then. And I think in that stage, you can start doing, a content where you're showcasing that you have knowledge and you have skill, and, you've got opinion and so on. But really, it's when you get to that mastery stage. So in Dr. Kneebone's book, he talks about the 3rd stage being master. And what defines that stage is where you're redefining your field, you're adding to it and building on it. So it's not just, you might be pioneering new things and possibly teaching as well. You're not one of the pack anymore, you're leading the pack. And I think that, to me, is the difference. Real thought leadership is where people are either leading or kind of in some way reshaping the conversation and saying something that's just a little bit new, or saying it in a different way. It doesn't have to be a completely unique thought, but it does have to be a little bit different to just chipping into the conversation.
Yeah, and I guess what you're highlighting there is something I've been sort of tussling with over the years, which is, an idea between the word specialist and the word expert. And I've kind of had a bit of an issue really with the word expert in many ways, because it kind of almost sets a precedent or an expectation that, wow, this person is going to blow me away. Whereas actually, if you say specialist, it kind of means that you've niched down on a particular topic or subject, but you don't actually have to be amazing at it. And so there's almost like there's a little kind of comfort blanket there for a specialist, because they don't have to actually prove anything. It's just, I specialize in this. Whereas actually an expert, what you're doing is you're saying, actually, I'm a bit different. I'm both special, but I'm also really good at this. So it kind of sets that expectation. Do you think there's a kind of a risk there? And is it the fact that you have to have kind of, as you say, moved away from the pack, that means then you could actually justify calling yourself an expert in a particular topic, and before that you are just a specialist?
It's really interesting one. The thing is about expertise is that there's no moment where you suddenly qualify to be an expert and you get your certificate of I am an expert. I mean, there might be, for example, you might get, I don't know, your PhD, or you might, land a role. I think interestingly, when I think back to when I was a journalist and I had to speak to experts, and obviously, I don't necessarily know an expert in a particular field. So I'm like, right, how am I going to justify choosing this person over that person? So why person A, not person B? So often you would go through the academic route. If somebody's a professor of something, then you can assume that they're probably a specialist and they're an expert in it. It may be like a job title. So, I don't know, lead engineer at X brand. So, once you get to a certain point in your career, you've risen. Wow, that was tricky getting that word. Risen through the ranks to a particular point. Again, that's a sort of a stamp of expertise. Authoring a book as well. And now there's much more, people take self-published books much more seriously these days. But back when I was a journalist, it was like, no self-published. You have to have been good enough to get an actual legitimate publisher to kind of say, yes, this is something we want to publish. So yeah, I think there's no one thing that says you're an expert. You have to prove it. And I think the thing is, as you get more expert in whatever it is that you've decided to specialize in, it's that classic thing of the more you know, the more you realize you don't know anything. So yeah, I don't think there's a point at which it becomes okay to say you're an expert, or if there is, it's different for everybody. Really, you just need to know more than your audience. Then you have expertise compared to them, right? So I would definitely say, in terms of choosing it as a marketing strategy, the brand itself doesn't have to have been established for a long time, but the people behind it do need to have that weight. You can't create a veneer of expertise, because people will pick beyond that. And if they can't find any substance, then it's basically gonna backfire.
So it feels like it is a little bit of a journey here. You identify something you resonate with, you're possibly good at it, there is an opportunity there, and then over time you maybe then specialize in it, and then you reach a point where you feel, okay, we as a team, or maybe as a brand as well, as a collaboration of individuals, you then think, actually we are a little bit different. We could actually now start pushing the boundaries. Is this where then this whole idea of thought leadership comes into play? Because this is an often used phrase, leading thought, I guess, leading thinking. I mean, in lots of ways, I've been attempting to do this in a couple of ways in marketing over the sort of last 5 to 10 years particularly in marketing sustainability, for example. That's a big hot topic. And again, this year, I think is going to be one of those, big things. Would I consider myself a thought leader? Possibly not, but I am trying to push those boundaries with my audiences and just kind of help people to think about this stuff. I mean, it is important, isn't it, really, to do this collaboratively? If you're you talk there about, sort of taking the reins of maybe, writing a book, or, even having a podcast, about a particular specialist area. And then you kind of position yourself as a little bit of an expert. But if you do it in isolation, it doesn't feel quite so powerful, does it? So if you are going to be a thought leader, do you kind of almost have to identify the audience that you are going to lead? Otherwise, you're not really leading anything, are you?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think certainly in terms of marketing, because there's different ways to look at it. Obviously the companies that we work with, and we mostly work with companies who have experts with it. So you'll have, we'll normally deal with the marketing person, and then they'll bring their subject matter experts into, briefings and so on. And when we do content strategy work, we will do a gold mining session. We call it a gold mining session with the experts to do that kind of, we were talking before about having the conversation, and then there's just that one little nugget that you go, oh, that's it. That's where we're going to build the kind of content strategy about. But to me, if you're thinking about it in marketing terms, and that could be marketing a personal brand, or it could be marketing, a business or an organization, you can be a thought leader without having any purpose. You can literally just go, I'm interested in the subject. I'm just going to put thoughts out there and let's see what happens. But if you're trying to do it intentionally, it's like with any marketing, there's 3 steps. It's 1, who am I? 2, who is my audience? And 3, how am I going to communicate? So you've got that Venn diagram of like, what is my specialism? What am I good at? And then the audience, what does the market need? Is there a market for this? So if I think about, me or us as a team, as an agency, I didn't start my career going, right, I'm going to learn to be a journalist so I can learn how to talk to experts so that one day I can have a copywriting agency that will specialize in communicating expertise. Like, that wasn't an intentional plan. I wanted to be a writer, but I'm pretty good at self-reflection, and I'm pretty good at sort of applying critical thinking to my own journey and my team as it's grown. When we started the business, so we're coming up 6 years old now, we were just a copywriting agency. We wrote stuff for people, whoever would pay us. It was quite broad. And as I sort of started to understand positioning more and more, I was thinking niche. Do we go down the industry vertical route and we only going to write for this type of business, or do we kind of just do websites, or what is it that we're going to do? And none of that sort of appealed to me. And it was really talking to funny enough, another agency owner, and describing what we did, that sort of she helped to reflect back to me that we help people to clarify and communicate their message, and we help them to establish their brand authority when they're experts. And working with expert-led brands, that really felt like it narrowed it down enough, but without really getting rid of anything. So, mostly we're in the B2B space, mostly, services rather than products. But then equally, we work with a B2C hair care brand, but they want to be experts in their field. So that was a nice niche to find.
It's interesting, isn't it, that you are actually what you're preaching, and it's actually, you've been on that journey. So there is a real kind of sense of, you get it, you understand it, not only the process, but actually the whole experience of, going through that journey, maybe as a small to medium-sized business where you think, we'd love to be able to cut through and, get competitive, but our product and service actually isn't that great, but our people are. They're a little bit special, they're a bit different. And do you feel then that this becomes something that, a business of any kind of size or scale, as long as they really understand their expertise, let's use that word now, that it can be a real kind of lever for, being more competitive, because it feels like it's a real differentiator. It kind of sort of cuts you through, much as it did for you in your journey with the agency. It kind of, because there's a load of content creators out there. I mean, millions of them. So, to you to say, look, we just focus really on, identifying and then communicating your expertise. That's a really nice, clear sort of proposition. So I guess this works actually for the clients too. Yeah, absolutely. And do you know what? It's really hard to copy because it's genuine. There's so many, brands and positioning kind of strategies, and they're very much created for the market. And I'm not saying that can't work. It absolutely can. But for me, if somebody's, I don't know, fresh out of, their media and communications degree, they can sit there and say that they are experts in communicating expertise. But again, when you dig under the surface, we've got the background, we've got, 20 plus years of experience doing that. And likewise, if somebody's been a copywriter for 20 years or, doing content, but they've been doing, I don't know, very, like advertising copywriting, again, it's hard to switch because there's not the genuine kind of backstory that comes with it. And I think that's what's so important. And it means that if you can authentically create that expert positioning, then it's a really hard thing to kind of to challenge in the marketplace. Whereas, if you're pricing on, I don't know, if you're doing it on pricing, you're positioning on pricing, that's obviously a race to the bottom line, to the bottom. And if you're positioning on
personality. You can have another brand that comes out with a more quirky personality. Like, if you look at Innocent Smoothies, when they started doing they were like, everyone was holding them up as brand tone of voice disruptors. And of course there wasn't anyone else that was, on the back of your smoothie bottle that was going, "Hi, I'm your smoothie, we're really nice." But now everyone's doing it. So it's harder to kind of defend that sort of thing that people can copy. People can't copy expertise in the same way.
If it's this important, then I think what we need to do is kind of help people to kind of identify it, because I'm sure somebody will be sat there thinking, this sounds really good. This sounds like the thing that I've been looking for. We've got good products and services, but they're not that different. What we need to really find and identify is what is our expertise. And as you interestingly say there, this could be personal brands. So this could apply to individuals as well as, large organizations with a great big portfolio of products and services. They might have some real innovation or technical expertise, or they might be just great at process. They might be very cost efficient. It could come from anywhere, couldn't it? How do you actually find it then? What is obviously without giving away everything that you do as a professional, as a company, but kind of where do you begin? How do you find your expertise?
Well, it's not really a case of giving it away, because there's no sort of templated way of doing it, because everyone's different. It really does just take digging, research, conversation, and at the risk of sounding like selling our own services, it does take an outsider. It's almost always you are too close to your own expertise to really get it. So I don't know if you've come across the 4 stages of competence. So you start off with something and you are unconsciously incompetent. So you're rubbish at a thing, but you don't know because you've not really tried it, or you think it's easy. Like everyone thinks they're a writer. They are unconsciously incompetent at it. And then you get to conscious incompetence, where you start trying something and you go, "Oh my gosh, this is a lot harder than I thought. This is really difficult. I'm really rubbish at it. I need to get better." Then you work hard and you practice and all the rest of it, and you get to conscious competence, where you realize that now you are able to do this thing, and maybe you're better than other people now because you've been putting that effort in. And then you get to unconscious competence, and that's where something comes so second nature to you that you don't even realize it's special anymore. So that's where you get those throwaway lines where people say something and they don't think it's interesting or special, but you, from an outside perspective, are going, "No, that's really fascinating." Especially like, for example, in tech companies, you've got the product lead who's kind of going, "Oh, it's got this feature and it's got this feature," and it's their baby and they're passionate about it. And none of that stuff is really that interesting. But like way down number 10 on their feature list, you're like, that sounds interesting. What does that do? And you think about what the benefit is, and you're like, that's the value proposition. That's what your audience cares about. So all that being a long way of saying, I've totally lost my train of thought. What was the question? And I'll go back to that. This happens to me increasingly.
So we were, well, it's absolutely fine. But when we were talking about the how you kind of find the expertise, how you kind of uncover out of the whole myriad of things you do as either an individual professional or somebody new to the game, or as a bigger, well-established brand, where do you kind of uncover this kind of level of expertise?
I was talking about that kind of needing that expert, that outside insight, and I think that doesn't have to come from using a consultant. You can use a branding specialist. You can talk to a copywriting agency that kind of has brand expertise, but it could be as simple as just you start by thinking. Journaling, I think, is really useful. To me, writing is thinking. So kind of having that conversation with yourself, really, a conversation with your team, talking to current customers and clients to see what they think. What is it that they think is good about you? What is different? What means something to them? And just having that outside perspective that you can start, and also thinking about, when we do kind of brand messaging work, we look at, we speak to normally the leadership team, representatives from the business, and we normally ask them, why do you love your job? What is it that is good about working here? What are the company values? So sometimes it will be a values thing. So, increasingly people are doing things like becoming B Corp, so that the offering they have might be sort of similar to most people, but if they're a B Corp, that's really like a hallmark stamp of like, yes, we are, good for people, planet, and profit. So it's those sorts of things, and it doesn't have to be expertise. Like you said, something like process can be really important. If you have a really slick way of delivering your service, and that can be your value proposition, brilliant. You know, I wouldn't even necessarily, we don't say, oh, we're experts in this. Like, we say that we work with experts, we communicate expertise. My hope is that, you know, and we're very fortunate, we get the majority of our work comes through either repeat business or referrals. So it's the, you know, that's the nice thing about expertise. It does, you know, if you can prove it, if you can actually back it up, it does generate word of mouth. And you don't, it's hard to build and it takes time. That's the thing. Building an expert reputation does take time. You're not going to be, it's not a growth marketing or performance marketing tactic. It's a brand building exercise. And so that does take time. But it continues to pay dividends for a very long time. You know, and we've never spent any money on advertising in any way, shape, or form, because work comes to us. So we've spent a lot of time creating good content, being helpful, coming on podcasts, doing speaking engagements, those sorts of things, so that we can showcase that expertise. And then, yeah, the right people come to us. So it's one way of doing it.
Feels like there's almost a need within this kind of mix then to not fear failure, because if you're going through this transition between, you know, not being aware of what you're good at all the way through to, yeah, actually unconscious, you know, just brilliance, you know, at the far end of the journey, hopefully, if it all works out well. It's not going to be a perfect journey, is it? This is the thing, is, you know, you're going to be trying things, you know, thought leaders often are pushing those boundaries, and then they actually push up against something which clearly then doesn't ever work, or just doesn't come off, or the world changes, or, you know, you get some big sort of macro thing that changes everything. If that kind of happens, it's kind of, there's almost like part of this, well, no, actually, it should be a question really, is part of this the fact you have to embrace challenges, you have to embrace failure. It's not all going to be a perfect story, is it, being an expert or thought leader? There's going to be bumpy roads at times, aren't there?
100%. Yeah, I think that's true of anything. If you, like, I'm a natural perfectionist, but I consider myself a recovering perfectionist, because I am working really hard on it. And I think with anything in life, you know, if you're going to get good at it, you learn, I think, more sometimes from your failures than you do from your successes. For example, last year, I gave an in-person talk, and I hadn't given one since before the pandemic. So, you know, it was been a long time. And I was very deliberately chose to do this particular talk because it was not in Bristol, it was up in the Midlands, and you know, it wasn't particularly to my target audience group, but I wanted a place where I could fail safely, that it didn't really matter. You know, I didn't want to be in front of like a big group of Bristol tech companies, which I would really want to have a good reputation with them. And I went to this and I gave the talk, and you know, it was fine, but it wasn't great. And I felt a bit downhearted afterwards, and I was driving back, and I thought, well, I could just sit here and mope, or I could do something about it. So I put on some podcasts on my phone to listen to on the way back. And I listened to some podcasts on public speaking and just some tips and tricks on how to do it better. And then about a month later or 2 months later, I gave another talk here in Bristol, again, within a group of people that I did want to really leave a good impression with. And I really felt personally like I smashed it. I don't know what anyone else thought, but I felt that I had done so much better a job. And it was because, you know, failure in itself is not helpful. Failure that you actively learn from is helpful. So I had not just gone, oh, I don't think I did a good job, and left it at that. That wouldn't have been useful. But I did something with it, and that was useful. And I think the next talk was a lot stronger for it. And that's why on our Monday team meetings, we go around the group and everyone brings a big win from the week before, because it's good to celebrate wins, and also a learning point. And we don't call them failures, we call them learning points, because, you know, if you've learned something from something, then chances are that another person in the team, they might make that same mistake in the future. But if they've learned from you, then you know, you shortcut that. So yeah, it's really powerful to frame failure in that way.
Yeah, and I love your honesty there. Thank you for that. I mean, it's you know, as somebody else who takes the stage quite regularly, or was prior to pandemic, it seems to be a digital virtual stage these days. But I know that kind of feeling of, you know when you've done a good job, you know when you've been a or let's call it expert, and other times where you think, oh, I just passed and that was
Yeah.
all it was.
Yeah.
And for whatever reason, and it's fine, but it's okay to be human, isn't it? As an expert. I mean, what we're not looking to advocate here, I'm guessing here, is that, this is a robotic thing. We're creating robots who, I am an expert and it's just very, very matter of fact. I mean, part of being a specialist, an expert, or, somebody who's really kind of the go-to for a particular message or particular sort of technical attribute, I guess, is also about being human, isn't it? Because these are the people we really want to be identifying with. And, again, being a thought leader, you can't sort of do that in a non-human way, can you?
I mean, you can, but people won't like you. So that's, I think, the other thing. I mean, certainly, in a business context, of course, there are terrible companies that do very, very well. They, have terrible ethics, horrible human beings working them. There's that. I'm not saying the only way to succeed is to be a nice person. However, certainly in my experience, people when they're choosing a business to work with, they want to know, one, can you do the job? And two, are we going to get on with you? Like, is this going to be an enjoyable experience, or is it going to be really difficult? And part of that will be the sort of personalities. And I think there are two ways to be an expert. You can be above everybody else and you can be looking down on people, and you can be like, oh, here am I sitting here being brilliant and all the rest of you are rubbish. And that's not really a great way to engage people. Or you can come from a more sort of serving sort of way, thinking, right, I know stuff and it's really important that other people know it, and I really want them to do well, so I'm going to share my knowledge and expertise with them. And that sense of lifting other people up, I think, is hugely important. It's certainly how I want to run my business. If I think about my motives for what we do, and it's really shifted over the years. I mean, when I started the business, I was a single mum with 9-month-old twins. I just wanted to make some money. But now it is very much a case of thinking, there was that politician quote talking about the world being sick of experts. And I don't believe that's true. I believe that the world is sick of fake experts, because there are too many people who are fake and they're saying, oh yeah, we're experts in this. And actually, when you dig under the surface, they're not. So what I really want to do is help those people with genuine expertise to do well. I want to champion those experts and help them to get the position that they deserve. So yeah, I don't see myself as going, oh, I know stuff, so, you should pay me lots of money. I think of it as like, look, I know stuff that can help you. My team is really good at this. Let's get involved. Let's get you out there. Let's increase your turnover. It doesn't have to not be money. It's not altruistic. It's, but let's help you succeed and achieve your dreams. And yeah, beat the fakers.
Yeah, and I think certainly from my perspective, I mean, that is so important. I think, and I would certainly agree, in my travels and conversations and client work, I would say you can spot it very, very quickly now, can't you? And I think it probably goes back to some of the things that you said earlier about kind of being very evidence-based. I think part of, from my perspective, part of this kind of journey, if anyone chooses to go along this route, is the fact that it is about evidence-based. So it's almost like you've got to be building your portfolio as you go, and it is those, as you've described them, those speaking slots. It is those moments with a client where you think, oh, that was just a sweet moment, and I'm going to capture that. I've got to make sure that kind of goes in our sort of show reel, as it were. And I think it is about being just very, very mindful all the time that it's important to document this, because how can you really evidence being an expert, specialist, or thought leader if you haven't kind of documented your journey? Because you have to, don't you?
Yeah, I think that's what I find so fascinating, is that, experts are experts in what it is that they do or know about. Because as we've said, there's skill. So there's like, an expert carpenter or whatever. There's knowledge, so a professor. And there's obviously a bit of crossover. A carpenter knows stuff and a professor can do stuff, but there's the knowledge and skill base. There's also, interestingly, another type of expertise, which is called, I wrote it down because I knew I'd forget it, interactional expertise, which is the ability to speak the language of experts whose work you cannot do. And if you take that to the extreme, that's a journalist, right? So somebody who can write in a way that showcases expertise, but without, like, we can write about, I don't know, embedded banking, but we can't we can't do code. So that's another one. And yeah, I think that it's important to, do you know what, I've done it again. I'm just gonna say it's the age thing and the brain and the children. That's what it does. It just gets to the end of a sentence, go, no, there's no ending for that one.
There was no. No, I totally get it.
There's going to be so many women in their 40s going, oh, thank God, it's not just me. Everybody does this.
I don't think it's just women. I can tell you it's not just women.
Well, that's the whole humanity as well, isn't it? You know, I know my stuff. I also know I sometimes forget what I'm saying halfway through a sentence. It doesn't make me less good at my job, but it does make me a human being. And I think that really puts people at ease, and it makes life so much easier, and it makes business so much nicer for me.
No, I totally agree. And I think it is that more conversational thing. I mean, there is a danger, I guess, here, as the topic we're talking about is, you know, expertise and thought leadership, is that, it has to be super serious and super professional, and you can't show any vulnerability. It has to be squeaky clean, very technical, because we need to kind of be impressing people. But I think what you're saying is actually, no, this is all about human interaction. And I love that thing that you talked about. I just want to come back to it, actually, that thing about serving, using expertise to serve others. And so it almost, I mean, as soon as you said that, I just saw this inverted kind of business hierarchy, because always, you know, back in the day when I first started in business, it was, you know, very much you had the boss, and it wasn't called leader, it was called the boss at the top of this pyramid, and everybody else worked underneath them. And so it was kind of like a pyramid. But what you're suggesting really is that if that person really at the top of the pyramid, or the thought leader or the expert, kind of is at the bottom of the pyramid, but you've turned the pyramid upside down, so they're supporting everybody who's potentially at the coal face or customer facing, then it really is quite an empowering position, isn't it? That feels really good. I want to be one of these people. It just feels like that's the right thing to be as a human.
And I think it's where society and it's where business organizations are evolving. So we've got several clients in the leadership development space, and one in particular we've been working with for a long time, and we did a series of articles around the evolution of kind of organizational structure. And if you look into it, so things like the teal color, I won't go into it, I'm not an expert in it, but it's very much more as the organization being like an organism, and it being sort of, you know, if you think about your body and how your body moves together, you know, you don't say, oh, the heart's the most important, the brain's the most important, or, you know, it's like, yeah, I mean, the heart and the brain are important, but I mean, you wouldn't be anywhere without skin. So, you know, there's that sort of idea of everything working together. And I think the lovely thing about expertise is that you can stay in your lane and you can concentrate on what you're good at. So often we could be a full service marketing agency, right? We can bring in a SEO person, we can bring in a designer and all the rest of it. But I've very deliberately gone, no, let's keep to what we're doing now. You know, we'll grow and evolve, because that's important. But so we work in partnerships with lots of other agencies. So we might work with an SEO agency, and they'll do what they do with the technical side of things, and they will inform what type of content we should be producing. You know, if the strategy is to go down the SEO route, often with thought leadership, it doesn't always work quite as well on the SEO side of things. Again, there's a whole other conversation to be had, purely because you're sort of disrupting things, so people aren't necessarily searching for what you're doing. But if you are working with a company that also needs to hit the targets in terms of SEO, we would listen to that SEO company. We wouldn't be sitting there going, well, we know about blogging, so we're not going to listen to you. We know about web pages. It's like, no, let's work together. And then it is more organic, and you do have that, you know, we're all serving the same client. We want them to succeed, so let's all work together to do that. I don't really like ego. I find sometimes agency world can be ego filled or ego driven, and I find that slightly exhausting. That feels like high school, and I didn't like high school, so
yeah. And I guess there's the reality of all of this, isn't it? But I just love the idea here of kind of this more holistic view of it, because it feels like thought leadership, expertise, specialism, whatever you want to couch it in terms of, you know, something that's meaningful to your own businesses, you know, people listening to this, is kind of, it doesn't exist in isolation. This is not an activity that's just going to be, yeah, we did it, you know, a couple of times, you know, last year we were thought leaders for a moment, you know, we had our big moment, and it's now just gone away. Now all we do is we talk about our products and services. This feels like this needs to be properly integrated into let's call it a marketing strategy, something that is more, you know, holistically driving the organization or the business forward. Do you see this as being really integral to propositions and to just the way you describe a business? You know, it almost feels like it has to be at the heart of it, really.
And I think that's why we've kind of sat and, we've got these two arms to our business with clarify and communicate and establish brand authority, because you've got to, and it doesn't have to be done in that order. So, for us, like I said, we're 6 years old. We were just kind of ticking along, building our expertise, but not really quite having a direction with it. And then about 2 years ago, sort of landed on what our niche is, and took a while to get out, new website launch and so on. So we had our brand, then we developed our expertise, and we went back to our brand and reshaped it and evolved it. So I think you can kind of go in cycles, but yeah, no, it's definitely foundational, and it's really tricky, because I don't want to sound egotistical, like, oh, the copywriter is the most important person you can speak to. But I mean, if you think of, we're human beings, right? We communicate verbally. Yes, we communicate visually. So obviously the kind of visual design and so on is important, but at some point you're going to need to say something about what you do, or write something about what you do, and you need the right words to do that. So if you can get that right to start with, then anyone else you speak to, when you're, I don't know, briefing your designer, when you're doing all of these things, you've got the right words, and it just makes everything so much easier. Something you said sparked this idea that, writing is thinking, and you don't have to be the writer. So in our case, often, the client might not be a writer. We were talking about, the carpenter or the professor. They might not be writers, or they might be academic writers, which is even worse. But actually, just for a lot of the time, our clients, the experts, subject matter experts within the business, who, they'll have been working with us for a while, and they'll say to us, it's been so helpful to clarify what I actually think about this. I'll come to a briefing and I'll sort of have some ideas about a subject, but then you'll, push back and ask different questions, and you'll force me to think more clearly about a subject. And that is so powerful, so that it actually goes beyond marketing, and it actually goes back and feeds back into the business and accelerates the expertise that is already there. So I've found that, there's articles that I've written for our blog, and, they've performed fine, but they've not, I wouldn't say they've necessarily been game-changing articles, but they've changed something in the way I've thought. And then when I'm networking or speaking at, on a podcast, or, in a sales conversation, I'll be thinking differently and I'll be speaking differently. And that has a huge impact. So we use words everywhere. Yes, you can write a blog post and it's useful as a blog post, but those words, and more importantly, those ideas that you've managed to articulate, you're going to use that everywhere in your business. And it might actually shape the future direction of a business, which is very exciting.
We talked a little bit earlier about the little golden moment in a conversation. I think you just caught it there. I think that was it. Awesome. I think that was the moment. It's just fascinating for me here, because this whole thing about it's articulating what it is you do. It's kind of challenging the status quo of your business. It's kind of really sort of getting to the heart of, that soul searching as to kind of why are we different? Why do we come together on a Monday morning to do business? Actually, who are we? It's this kind of profound sense of, knowing actually who you are. This is uncovering so much more than I thought it would in this. I just thought it's all about just finding you're a specialist, and this actually it's a really quite deep, profound exercise to go through, isn't it?
It takes a long time.
Yeah.
I think that's the thing, because sometimes we'll send out a proposal for something, and they're like, oh, I'm not sure about the budget. It's like, you can't you can shortcut it. It depends where you are. So interestingly, we did a round table end of last year, which we're still releasing the content for. And one of the guys who was involved, it was all about brand and how brand kind of evolves through the startup to scale up kind of process from MVP through to scaling. And one of the guys mentioned, obviously MVP, minimum viable product, but he was talking about the minimum viable brand, which I really, really loved, because at the beginning, you don't want to spend thousands and thousands of pounds, really defining, every nuance of your brand voice and so on. But you just need to get it, as somebody else, an author, I don't know if you've come across Watertight Marketing by Bryony Thomas, fantastic book. It's been out for 10 years, but it's still brilliant. And she talks about you have to start off functional, but not too embarrassing, and then iterate from there. And I think that's brilliant. So, you can start somewhere. You don't have to start with perfect. Start with maybe even a rough idea of what your expertise is or what your value proposition is. And then keep that in the back of your mind and sort of test it, with every conversation you have at networking or a networking event, or in a sales conversation or with your clients, you know, start to bring some of that language in and sort of see how it resonates and kind of adapt it. And, you know, every now and then through the evolution process, you know, even established brands will evolve. They'll evolve their positioning. You know, it might be every 10 years, but it's still important to do because society changes, the market changes, and technology changes. So yeah, it doesn't have to be perfect to start with, but definitely needs to evolve.
This is just such a lovely way of viewing your own business and doing that little bit of introspection in terms of, you know, actually, even if we're very well established, what have we been good at and why? You know, I mean, to both uncover the expertise, but also just to get that sense of, I guess, sort of belonging, because, you know, it could be that once you enter those kind of conversations, I mean, you might have seen this possibly, that, you know, once you get those conversations going within an organization, you know, that person who's been sitting quietly in the corner then just suddenly realizes, hold on a minute, I contributed to that. Oh my gosh, I'm actually more than I thought I was. It's quite a sort of a bonding sort of feeling going on here in terms of like team building.
Yeah, we're really like big on kind of like personality tests and things. Like, you know, I'm not saying that I don't like pigeonholing people, but I think personal, like understanding yourself as a person, like personality and skill and, you know, what you bring to a team as well as the expertise is really important. And funny enough, often experts will be in, I don't know if you know the DISC profile, they'll be in the kind of C category. They might be like very focused on the kind of the detail, but they're not necessarily good at communicating. And I think that's what's interesting about our job is being able to use that personality insight as well and kind of go, okay, you're the kind of expert who I'm going to have to tell you all my questions beforehand because you're going to need some time to think, versus somebody like me who's kind of an external processor. And as you can hear, I can talk for hours about pretty much anything. So I think you're right. It helps with the team building because you see what everyone contributes and what's different about everyone, and you need lots of different types of people, and often the experts are not always the loudest people. So yeah.
This has been so insightful, Rin. I mean, honestly, thank you so much for kind of guiding us through this. I mean, honestly, I thought I kind of knew this topic quite well, but actually what you've done is you've really opened up a whole Pandora's box of new things for me to think about, which I guess, you know, this is the whole point of these podcasts. But
I spend a lot of time thinking about this stuff. I think that's the thing. I spend and reading about it. I've mentioned Expert by Dr. Roger Kneebone, but another one I'd really highly recommend is The Business of Expertise by David C. Baker. That's a really good one as well. There's so much out there, and you know, to be an expert, it's not just about doing; it's also about learning from other people. You never stop learning, right? So that's very important.
And I guess that is the key point here, is that this is I can hear myself saying the word journey quite a number of times in this conversation, but it really is, isn't it? Yeah. It's like once you start on this thing, well, one, it's fascinating at a personal but also professional level, but two, you almost then can't stop, can you? This is, once you set on this journey, you're on this journey.
Yeah, definitely. It's fascinating, isn't it? Because then you can start expanding it into, like, you know, what's the meaning of life? Why are we here? What's our purpose? And I think I spend a lot of time thinking about that stuff because it's important to me. And, you know, there's the whole thing of work-life balance or work-life integration. But, you know, given how long we spend at work, it's important that it reflects who we are and what our goals are and what we want. So I think for me, all of this stuff feeds into itself and into each other and then into your relationships. And yeah, it's great fun.
So one top tip from Rin then, in terms of starting on that journey then, thought leadership, expertise, becoming an expert marketer, or, you know, delving into the organization to find those specialists and then kind of beginning those conversations. What would your, if there was one single top tip, what would that be?
Yeah, I guess a couple of things maybe. With expertise, don't worry about it. I think there's so much imposter syndrome. You know, I have imposter syndrome all the time. You know, I don't come from an agency background or a marketing background. So I sometimes sit there going, oh my gosh, how can I offer marketing services when I haven't done this? Which is why I'm doing one of the Mark Ritson mini MBA in marketing, because it'll help me to feel like I've had at least some formal training there. But don't worry about it, because actually you'll get there. And it is, as you said, it's a journey, and it will never end. You will constantly be evolving that. But also, not everyone has to be an expert, in the same way that not everyone has to be on the first page of Google. It's not possible. If everyone was on the first page of Google, nobody would be on the first page of Google. And it's the same thing. Not everyone can be an expert. And, you know, if you're in the journeyman stage in the middle, you can still do good business and you can still do good work and you can still make money. You know, there are other ways of positioning yourself as a person or as a business. And that can be really simple. You can be the only person in your area that does a particular thing. There might be millions of people over the world that do it, and you're not the expert, but you're the person that's local. You know, so it's not the be all and end all, but certainly understanding if you do have expertise, how can you use that? And yeah, what do you love as well? That's another part of it. So yeah, you might be really good at something, but if you don't enjoy it, there's no point, is there?
And I suppose at the end of the day, just kind of building on that idea is that, you know, you are the expert at being you. And, you know, ultimately that really is, you know, this whole life thing isn't, get too profound here, but, you know, this whole life thing is, you know, about being you and just being the best you possibly can be. And it isn't really a competition, is it? This is the thing. I mean, I think a lot of the sort of misconception of what an expert is that there's almost like this hierarchy or league table of expertise. Well, there doesn't have to be, does there? Because ultimately you are the expert of all the things that you bring to the mix. And that's all you could ever hope to be, really, I guess.
Exactly. I think that's the thing. With everything in life, it's balance, right? So on the one hand, you want to push yourself, you want to push back your own boundaries and get just outside your comfort zone and, you know, see what you can achieve in life if you want to. But you might be perfectly happy not doing that. Or likewise, your career might not be your priority. So you might think, do you know what? I want to show up at 9, I want to leave at 5. That's all I really want to do. I earn enough money, and actually I'm really into stargazing. And I'm just going to do that. And because I think the thing about expertise is it often, certainly in the context we're talking about it, you know, like marketing and, you know, personal brand and so on, there's a sort of audience for that expertise. But you could be an expert just for you. You can go, right, yeah, I really love stargazing and I'm going to read all the books and I'm going to get really, really knowledgeable. And nobody ever has to know that you're good at it. It doesn't matter because you enjoy it. So there's also that balance.
Wonderful freedom here. It's not about being constrained.
Great.
It's I want to do this. I want to be part of this. You know, I want to be an expert.
I want to be an expert in mushrooms. I really want to learn how to identify safely and be able to pick wild mushrooms. Like that's a personal goal. I don't know why. It just seems like a cool thing to do. So that's on my personal goal list. But I'm never going to get talks about it because I don't want to.
And I think the key word there is safely.
Yes, exactly. That's the point. That's what's putting me off.
I know. In our garden, we've got about 6 different types that pop up, and you feel like you can kind of identify them every autumn, but we're not 100% sure.
Not sure. So I'm sure there must be some sort of kit. Somebody needs to invent a kit where you can take a slice of a mushroom and you can find out instantly whether it's toxic. That would be great. There we go. Idea for somebody to pick up and run with.
There you go. Grab this idea, people, and get back to Rin. How do people contact you, Rin, if everybody wants to either come back to you with the whole mushroom sort of situation solved forever and teach you mushrooms, or if they want to come back to you to continue the discussion about thought leadership and expert marketing, how do they get a hold of you?
So the useful thing about having a name like Rin Hamburgh is that it's quite unusual. So you can just Google me. But obviously we've got our website. I'm on LinkedIn. The company's on LinkedIn. So the only thing that's left to do is spell it, which is Rin is just very simply R-I-N for November, and then Hamburgh is like Hamburg but with an H on the end.
Perfect. So just Google Rin and you will find how to become a thought leader and be able to get further service and sort of expertise and guidance in this journey. This has been such an interesting conversation, Rin. I'm so grateful that you spent the time
having me on.
Sort of with us. And I'm off to remind myself about mushrooms, but also to kind of ponder on how I can really sort of accelerate my journey, because I think there's something in it for all of us really here. So thank you so much for your time.
Very welcome.